Dick Award right here. It's actually been here since 1984, so take 2 years off that, and that's how long it's been here at Norwescon. Really appreciate everyone coming out, and some of you who keep coming back year after year, you're great. You support the award, you support the books. How many people have read at least one of the books? Well, 5 of the authors are here tonight. You'll be able to get autographs. There'll be pictures afterwards, so don't evaporate, everyone. But at 8:30, I will be kicking you out, and I apologize. Tonight, for me, is kind of fun, because of the nominees, some of the books that I've read, because I've read them all now, they just blow me away. They blow me away. The cutting edge science fiction that we have, the issues and the concepts that are brought forth, sometimes question who we are and why we do things that we do. And I find myself questioning myself, why do I think this way? And it's because of you guys. At this time, I'd like to introduce our chair for Norwescon 41. We have Lori Parker. Lori.
So, for those of you who weren't previously when I ran out of this has been a bit of a difficult year for Norwescon. We've lost 5 members of the Norwescon family. We've lost Zach Wilcoit, a longtime member of the team staff, and a recipient of this year's Norwescon Award. We've lost Gary Harrison, who had been attending since Norwescon 1. I used to run our movie previews back when it was still filming projectors. We lost James Young of the registration team. We also lost Mary Rosenblum, a long-time member of the participant in the Fairwood Writers Workshop. And we also lost a long-time member of the Wrestling Hong Kong and lifetime member Cheryl Ferguson, who many of people knew very well. And just wanted to take a moment to honor all of those. Now, on to several people of you have asked me about ribbons. I will not be handing them out during the ceremony, but after you get autographs from all of our nominees, I will be handing them out for a few minutes, and then once William kicks us out of this room, I will take a few minutes out and call if anybody else would like to pick up the ribbons that I've been talking about all weekend. And with that, I will hand this back over to William.
I'd like to introduce Gordon Van Gelder, one of the administrators of the award. He has some words of wisdom I think he was imparting to us.
Those are my words of wisdom. No, seriously, welcome to this year's Philip K. Dick Awards, where we gathered to celebrate and honor Philip K. Dick, the best paperback original work of science fiction published in the last year. In developing and coming up with this balanced set of books, our judges went through somewhere between 100 and 120 books, I think, somewhere in that area. And before we forget, let's give them a big round of applause. The judges this year were Deborah Ross, Robert Nova, James Stoddard, Amy Thompson, who's over here. So you can all mob her afterwards and blame her if you don't like it. And Rick Wilbur. Um, I will say a couple things about the award later, but one of the great things about this ceremony is that we let all the nominees read from their works, and I think we should get right into that. So, without much more ado, let me introduce our first nominee and have her come up to read, and that is Meg Illison, reading from the Book of Etta, published by 47 North.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to read from the very first chapter of the Book of Etta so as to not give too much away. There's a lot of surprises in this book. And I'm going to pick up just into the first chapter. What you need to know is that Eddie's a raider who kills slavers, and he has just liberated a girl they're calling the last girl in the world from the people who owned her. Eddie didn't touch the girl. He didn't try to make her meet his eyes or take his hand. He sat down, opened up a canteen, and set it near her. It brimmed over with water, the drops running down both sides in the sunlight. As soon as he was out of arm's reach, the girl seized the canteen and drank in hasty gulps. She let it fall to the ground empty. She didn't replace the cap or say anything. He didn't talk to her. He smiled as nicely as he knew how, and he returned to plucking the birds. When they were spitted and roasting, he let the smell of it bring her closer. When she came near enough that he could see her trembling, he tore off a hot leg and blew on it. The bird's bones were tiny, and he had to hold it between two fingers as it smoked. "My name is Eddie," he said softly. "I'd like to know your name. You don't have to tell me, and I'll share food with you even if you don't. But it would be better for us to share dinner if I at least knew what to call you." He sat waiting, trying to encourage her with eye contact, but not dominate her. "Chloe," she said very quietly, before reaching out with both hands to snatch the partridge leg. She curled her tiny hands around it and brought it to her mouth. "Careful, it's still..." The girl had eaten every shred of meat and was gnawing at the knuckle. "Well, all right then, Chloe." He pulled the whole bird off the spit and onto his metal plate. With 2 knives, he held it down and cut it in half. He held the plate out to her, one thumb holding down his own dinner. She snatched her half up and sat down in the dirt, teeth buried in a thigh meat. "All right then," Eddie repeated, smiling. The girl had been the perfect reason to avoid the city. Eddie told the people of his village that he raided in the city with the arch every summer. He brought back all kinds of useful objects to prove it. The truth was that Eddie had not been to Estiel since he was 17 years old, a still green raider with only 2 years behind him. His very first solo raid at 15 had taken him straight into the heart of the city, cocksure and invincible. He had come back with precious, irreplaceable things. He was a hero. Like a hero, he'd walked out of nowhere in his 16th year, a little taller and stronger, but not much wiser. He left on the same warm spring day, intending to return at the end of summer. He followed the same route, and he raided the same part of the city. He had walked back to nowhere in the dead of winter with nothing but his gun. He had lost every ounce of extra weight on his body and shaved his head. He spoke to no one until 3 whole moons had passed. When his voice had returned and he was no longer starving, he told them he had gotten lost. When he left the following summer, he followed the same roads, all of them leading toward Estiel under the dead rainbow. He never got close to the city. He raided other places and found people to trade with and returned a hero once more. The reputation had stuck, and Eddie rescued girls and women to keep it safe, to cut off questions about when he was going to settle down. Chloe was the first girl he had found this year. It seemed like a good omen to have rescued one so soon. Eddie walked to the gates of nowhere holding Chloe's hand. The child was sleepy and sick of walking, he could tell, but she did not complain. He whistled the signal, and half-covered face appeared over the guard tower above a shotgun. "Your name?" Eddie lifted the child up onto his hip. He was too weary to be glad to be home, but he hoped Chloe would be happy here. He pulled back his hood to show his shaved head. The spotter would know his face in the afternoon light. "Etta, daughter of Ina. And this is Chloe, daughter of the road." The gates opened and they walked through. Etta turned to the little girl and spoke softly in her ear. "I don't know what they told you," she said, "but you are not the last girl in the world." Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. That was the Book of Etta by Meg Elison. The next reader will be from, our nominee is Six Wakes by Mur Lafferty. Mur.
No, you came unprepared and didn't bring your book and had to download a free sample on the plane.
I have a book over here. Do you want it?
That's probably for the best.
Okay.
Hey, I've read this one. I'm very sorry. It's been a day. I'm also reading from chapter 1, so I don't have to explain anything. Tried it from another chapter, didn't work. This is not a pipe. Sound struggled to make its way through the thick synthetic amnio fluid. Once it reached Maria Arena's ears, it sounded like a chainsaw, loud, insistent, and unending. She couldn't make out the words, but it didn't sound like a situation she wanted to be involved in. Her reluctance at her own rebirth reminded her where she was and who she was. She grasped for her last backup. The crew had just been moved into their quarters on the Dormeyer, and the cloning bay had been the last room they'd visited on their tour. There they had done their first backup on the ship. Maria must have been in an accident or something soon after, killing her and requiring her next clone to wake. Sloppy use of a life wouldn't make a good first impression on the captain, who likely was the source of the angry chainsaw noise. Maria finally opened her eyes. She tried to make sense of the dark, round globules floating in front of her vat, but it was difficult with the freshly cloned brain being put to work for the first time. There were too many things wrong with such a mess. With the smears on the outside of the vat and the purple color through the bluish fluid Maria floated in, she figured the orbs were blood drops. Blood shouldn't float. That was the first problem. If blood was floating, that meant the grav drive that spun the ship had failed. That was probably another reason someone was yelling, the blood and the grav drive. Blood in a cloning bay, that was different too. Cloning bays were pristine, clean places where humans were downloaded into newly cloned bodies when the previous ones had died. It was much cleaner and less painful than human birth, with all its screaming and blood. But again with the blood. The cloning bay had 6 vats in 2 neat rows, filled with blue-tinted synth amnio fluid, and the waiting clones of the rest of the crew. Blood belonged in the med bay down the hall. That unlikely occurrence of a drop of blood originating in the med bay, floating down the hall and entering the cloning bay to float in front of Maria's vat would be extraordinary. But that's not what happened. A body also floated above the blood drops. A number of bodies, actually. Finally, if the grav drive had failed and if someone had been injured in the cloning bay, another member of the crew would have cleaned up the blood. Someone was always on call to ensure a new clone made the transformation from death into their new body smoothly. No, a perfect purple sphere of blood should not be floating in front of her face. Maria had now been awake for a good minute or two. No one worked the computer to drain the synth amnio. That's really hard to say. Why did I write this? Sorry. Fluid to free her. A small part of her brain began to scream at her that she should be more concerned about the bodies, but only a small part. She'd never had occasion to use the emergency release valve inside the cloning vats. Scientists had implemented them after some techs had decided to play a prank on a clone and woke her up only to leave her in the vat alone for hours. When she'd gotten free, stories said, the result was messy and violent, resulting in the fresh cloning of some of the techs. After that, engineers added an interior release switch for clones to let themselves out of the tank if they were trapped for whatever reason. Maria pushed the button and heard a clunk as the release triggered, but the synth amnio fluid stayed where it was. A drain relied on gravity to help the fluid along its way. That's plumbing 101. The valve was open, but the fluid remained a stubborn womb around Maria. She tried to find the source of the yelling. One of the crew floated near the computer bank, naked, with wet hair stuck out in a frightening, spiky corona. Another clone woke. 2 of them had died? Behind her, crewmates floated in 4 vats. All of their eyes were open, and each was searching for the emergency release. 3 clunks sounded, but they remained in the same position Maria was in. Maria used the other emergency switch to open the vat door. Ideally, it would have been used after the fluid had drained away, but there was little ideal about this situation. She and a good quantity of the synth amnio fluid floated out of her vat, only to collide gently with the orb of blood floating in front of her. The surface tension of both fluids held, and the drop bounced away. Maria hadn't encountered the problem of how to get out of a liquid prison in zero grav. She experimented by flailing about, but only made some of the fluid break off the main bubble and go floating away. In her many lives, she'd been in more than one undignified situation, but this one was new. Action and reaction, she thought, and inhaled as much of the oxygen-rich fluid as she could, and then forced everything out of her lungs as if she were sneezing. She didn't go as fast as she would have had it been air, but she was still inside the viscous fluid, but it helped push her backward and out of the bubble. She inhaled air and then coughed and vomited the rest of the fluid in a spray in front of her, banging her head on the computer console as her body's involuntary movements propelled her farther. Finally out of the fluid and gasping for air, she looked up. Oh shit. 3 dead crewmates floated around the room amid the blood and other fluids. 2 corpses sprouted a number of gory tentacles, bloody bubbles that refused to break away from the deadly wounds. A 4th was strapped to a chair to the terminal. Gallons of synth-amnio fluid joined the gory detritus as the newly cloned crew fought to exit their vats. They looked with as much shock as she felt at the surroundings. Captain Katrina de la Cruz moved to float beside her, still focused on the computer. Maria, stop staring and make yourself useful. Check on the others. Maria scrambled for a handhold on the wall to pull herself away from the captain's attempts to access the terminal. Katrina pounded on a keyboard and poked at the console screen. Ian, what the hell happened? My speech functions are inaccessible, the computer's male, slightly robotic voice said. Ceci n'est pas un pipe, muttered a voice above Maria. It broke her shock and reminded her of the captain's order to check on the crew. The speaker was Akihiro Sato, pilot and navigator. She had met him a few hours ago at the cocktail party before the launch of the Dormeyer. Hiro, why are you speaking French? Maria said, confused. Are you all right? Someone saying aloud that they can't talk is like that old picture of the pipe that says this is not a pipe. It's supposed to give art students deep thoughts. Never mind. He waved his hand around the cloning bay. What happened anyway? And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. That was from 6 Wakes by Murray Lafferty. The 3rd nominee this year is After the Flare by Deji Bryce Alukaton, published by the Unnamed Press.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here. I'm going to start reading. It's in the middle of the book. The main character is living in Nigeria and West Africa, and his job is to create a neutral buoyancy laboratory, which is basically a giant swimming pool where astronauts train before they go into space. NASA has a huge one. There are other ones around the world. Never leave your gecko phone unattended. That was usually easy advice for Brackett to follow, as its tactile, almost rubbery skin warmed to his fingerprints and eagerly lapped up his biometric data. But when he returned to Nijapool, he became distracted by the delivery of the Chinese traders' water tankers, which were already reversing into the pool facility one by one to empty their cargo, some 20 of them in all. His gecko phone had disappeared by the time he came back to his desk. It wasn't sitting on the power cells where he'd left it to charge, and it wasn't perched on the ceiling near the overhead lighting. He called out to the device, but it didn't respond. Under his desk, he found the thin husk of the external battery with the edges burned black. This was bad. Someone had been in here. He opened the small freezer in the refrigerator and pulled out a frozen cup of miya yakwa, a mix of beef, onions, peanuts, and collard greens cooked in palm oil. He threw this in a microwave until it was steaming hot before chewing it down. Eventually, the particles from his breath salted the air, and he spied a subtle movement near a pencil case near his hand. The gecko phone turned off its camouflage and slid before him. It was blinking with a red error message. Attempted intrusion, partition, 6% memory loss, emergency code, 465664. A digital security guard arrived as Brackett was trying to make sense of the message, having been hailed automatically by the device. Malfunction, sir? The officer said, picking up the gecko phone. Worse than that. Her face had the soft symmetry of an attractive woman with inviting dark brown eyes, and she had a slender, androgynous torso. She moved with a feminine air and was wearing a light perfume. First time he'd seen a transgender woman in Kano. She seemed to be about Sybil's age. The name on her badge read Inni. She examined the gecko phone for a minute. This looks like a powerful attack, she concluded, handing it back to him. Did you find the battery? Brackett fished the charred husk from under his desk. I think it's an electrical shortage. Your G-phone ejected it. It must have overloaded the circuit intentionally. Smart. At this, the gecko phone began blaring out a warning signal and tried to scramble out of Brackett's pocket. He held it in place, calming it with his fingerprint signature. Hang on, the officer said, using her own gecko phone, a more powerful, rooted version of his own device with more controls. I think the adversary is still here. Where? Somewhere close by. She crouched down to look under the desk. What are we looking for? She held up the battery and pulled off a kind of furry hook from the surface. This looks like a fang. Snake? No, a spider. Brackett felt his skin tingle. He'd never liked spiders. Snakes he could marvel at in their streamlined, reductive elegance. Spiders were all spindly legs and neurotic movements. You don't think it escaped? Oh no, it's very close to us. The officer removed a wand from her hip belt. I can neutralize it with this taser. What should I do? Keep looking, just don't touch it. They're deadly. They checked under his chair and his desk, but didn't find anything, Brackett trying hard not to cower behind her. She courageously lifted up papers and moved aside a tiny coffee table. Nothing. The refrigerator, she whispered. I'll move it and you take the damn thing out. He stepped close to it, feeling his heart pound. Maybe I should call for backup, the officer began, but Brackett was already wrenching the refrigerator from its socket. The spider was about twice the size of his hand, covered with furry bristles, and had a body the color of sand. It had 8 optical cameras and 1 hardwired data transmission fang that poked out from its orifice. The electrical circuits had been woven into the carapace of the insect. Exposed in plain sight, it splayed out all 8 of its legs. Then it shot out its bristles, which stung Brackett's skin. Damn, shoot it! The spider scurried up the wall before the officer could fire, leaving a trail of bristles behind it. Brackett retreated to the door to close off its escape. It skittered across the ceiling, moving too quickly for a natural insect. Now it was over his head, its sensors scanning for an exit. It spied the G-phone in Brackett's pocket and reared up its forelegs. It leapt for his chest. Thank you.
That was Deji Bryce Okluto. I can't pronounce it. I'm sorry, guys. Anyhow, great story, by the way. The next one nominee is The Wrong Stars by Tim Pratt. Angry Robots book is the publisher. Tim.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning. Callie floated, feet hooked over a handrail in the observation deck, and looked through the viewport at the broken ship beyond. The wreck hung motionless, a dark, irregular shape, a bit of human debris where no such debris should be. Was this a crisis or an opportunity? Every unexpected event could be one or the other, and sometimes they were both. The dead ship was long and bullet-shaped, pointlessly aerodynamic, apart from a bizarre eruption of flanges, fins, and spikes at one end that looked like the embellishments of a mad welder. The wrecked craft was far smaller than Callie's own ship, the White Raven, a fast cruiser just big enough for her crew of 5 people, or 4, or maybe 6, depending on how you defined people, to live comfortably along with whatever freight or prisoners they had to transport. If the White Raven was a family home, the wreck was more like a studio apartment. Ashok floated into the compartment, orienting himself with tiny puffs of air that burst from his fingertips and heels. Showy and unnecessary, but he had a gift for turning simple things into engineering problems he could solve in complicated ways. He hovered with his head near hers, sharing her view, though it probably looked a lot different to him. "Oh, Captain, my Captain." She glanced at his complex profile and grunted, "You got new eyes?" He shook his head. These are wearables, not integrated. I'm giving them a test run before I implant them. That's almost cautious by your standards. He grinned insofar as he was physically able. One of the lenses on the array attached to his face rotated and lengthened toward the viewport. So, do we get to crack the mystery ship open and see what's inside? She went, pretending she hadn't already decided. Last time I let you clamber into a wreck, you lost an arm. Ashok held up his current prosthetic. The translucent diamond housing revealed glimpses of the mechanical motion within as he flexed his hand, which was really more like a nest of tiny, versatile manipulator arms. That was just an opportunity for an upgrade, Cap. I say we fly over with torches and cut a hole and poke our heads in and look around. No surprise there. Ashok believed in radical self-improvement. And every mystery was a potential upgrade in the waiting. I like the enthusiasm, Ashok, but we're still fact-finding. This doesn't look like any human ship I've ever seen, and it doesn't look like a liar vessel either, despite all that weird shit on the stern. Didn't the Jovian Imperative try to solve its toxic waste problems by launching tubes full of poison randomly into space? What if this is one of those? Space is big, so throwing bad stuff into it wasn't such a terrible idea as far as terrible ideas go. But that's not a waste container. Our sensors sniffed it thoroughly. No toxins or bad radiation. Besides, your boy Shal just identified the vessel. He's not my boy, she said, but she was too interested in the wreck to put much growl into the ritual denial. So what is it? Once Shal filtered out all the weird stuff welded to the ship's ass, the profile matches a model in the historical database. Ashok lifted his chin, which unlike the rest of his head, still looked like a baseline human's. That captain is a Goldilocks ship. Callie frowned. He might as well have told her it was a Viking longboat or an Apollo module. From the bad old days? Before we had bridge generators? A genuine old-timey antique? It's got to be about 500 years old. Ashok gave himself a little spin, changing his orientation so she was looking at his feet, because actually being still for any length of time was outside his considerable skill set. A Goldilocks ship, wow. Weren't they propelled by atomic bombs? Pretty much, yeah. At least the first wave, and this was one of the earliest models launched. Looks like it's had some modifications since then, though. The Goldilocks ships were no frills. They didn't go in for decorative S&M spikes. Maybe a pirate crew found it and tried to make it look more badass? That ship is old, Cap. No pirate would want it for anything other than scrap or to sell to a collector. So what's it doing here? Goldilocks ships aren't supposed to come back. That's the whole point. They took one-way journeys, way out, trips of desperation and exploration. Now, 500 years later, it's just floating in trans-Neptunian space. By cosmic terms, it's practically back where it started. Ashok nodded. That's the big juicy mystery. No way that ship came back from anywhere, right? It's not like they had Tanzer drives back then. They weren't zipping around the galaxy. Unless they found a bunch of plutonium lying around on their colony planet and built more bombs to stick up the ship's butt, there was no coming back. I hate mysteries, Callie said, not entirely accurately. You always think it's going to be a box full of gold, but usually it's a box full of spiders. Ashok made a noise that might have been a snort in a baseline human. And yet you always end up opening the lid, don't you? What can I say? Callie unhooked her feet and pushed off toward the doorway leading deeper into the ship. I like gold more than I hate spiders.
That was from The Wrong Stars by Tim Pratt. Our next finalist is Revenger by Alistair Reynolds, published by Orbit. And Al lives in Wales and couldn't be here tonight, so Dave Tackett is reading for him.
I guess as a lot of you know, this is the beginning of the book. So, and I'll try not to destroy the names here too badly, okay? Adrana had always hated Dr. Morshanks. He'd been the family physician since our parents landed on Mazaril before we were born. He'd been there as Adrana and I grew up, and he'd been there when the plague took our mother. The plague was what turned my father against men like Captain Rackamore, because he reckoned they were meddling in things that were better off being locked up. But as far as I know, no one ever proved the plague came out of a bauble. None of that stopped him from being talked into a stupid investment in exactly the thing he disapproved of. He was like that, easily persuaded against his own judgment, and it came to a head in the Hall of History on Forge Day evening in spring of 1799. Father had gone to see what came of his investment, and because he wanted to make a good showing amongst all the moneyed bigwigs in the Mausoreal Chamber of Commerce, he'd brought both of us along for the evening. We were meant to be on our best behavior, prim and proper educated young ladies. Adrana wasn't having any of it. Dr. Moorshanks, called Father, noticing the family physician a few tables away. Come and join us. It's been too long since you've seen Adrana and Arafura. Look how much they've grown. Dr. Moorshanks limped over. He was a pepper pot-shaped man who always wore black, and too many layers of it. Always a pleasure, Mr. Ness, he said in his gruffy, greasy voice, touching a hand to his forehead. And then he started humming little tunes as if his own thoughts needed blacking out, the way one skull can smother the signal out from another. Your daughters are a great credit to you, he said, buttering his words until they were soggy. They must be a great consolation given the disappointments of Captain Lars's expedition. Your investment wasn't too burdensome, I presume. We'll weather it, Father said, putting a brave face on things. You always do, Mr. Ness, and it's to your credit. As are your daughters, fine specimens both. It's been my pleasure and my privilege to have seen them through their development. He carried on with the humming and started digging his short, fat fingers into his pocket. Would you like, We're a bit old for sweets now, Adrana said. I'm 18 and Fura's not far off it. It's all right, I said, allowing the doctor to take out his bag of sweets and pop a crystallized ginger into my palm. I've been meaning to visit. I wanted to talk to you about something that might be of interest, especially in Arafura's case. These childhood years are so precious. She's not a child, Adrana said, and I know what you've got in mind. It's that drug, isn't it? The one that slows things down. Well, you can... There's no need for that tone, Father said. The doctor's been very good to you and Fura over the years. Oh, yes, and not that there's ever been anything odd about him skulking around the house like he lives there. It's no good now, Dr. Moonface. She had a way of slipping that out as if it was his actual name so casually that sometimes you barely noticed it at all. I'm old enough to know better, and Fura will be soon. Apologize to the doctor right now, said Father. I won't. You can't make me just as you can't make me enjoy this stupid evening with a stupid captain and all your stupid friends trying to pretend they haven't blown half their fortunes. I can have Paladin take you home, Father said in a warning tone. Our old red robot swiveled its glass dome of a head trying to follow the conversation. Lights flashed on and off in the dome. Paladin often got confused when its name was mentioned until it was given simple direct orders. I'll be in touch, Dr. Moorshanks said, tucking his sweets back into his pocket. I'm sorry for my daughter's rudeness, said Father. Think nothing of it, Mr. Ness. The emotional liability of the young is nothing new to me. We watched him turn and waddle back to his table. He had a roll of flesh on the back of his neck like an inflated tube. He was still humming. There was no call for that, Father said. I've never been so humiliated, Adrana finished. You know what the real humiliation is, being a Ness. That's what. Groveling our way up the Mausoreal social ladder, trying to pretend we're something we're not. In a way, I was glad when a drunkard started shouting obscenities from the audience. Up on the podium, Captain Malanglar kept talking, and then someone from the Chamber of Commerce stood up and tried to shout down the drunk man. But by then it was too late. Constables in pillbox hats and flashing blue epaulets came busting through the audience from the back of the room and started wrestling the drunkard away from the proceedings. But he was determined to put up a fight, brawling with the constables and staggering into a table, sending it toppling. Paladin swiveled around. Disturbance detected, it kept saying. Disturbance detected. Father started rolling up his sleeves. I suppose I'd better, he was saying, making a show of letting everyone know he was at least considering getting involved, even though he was happier behind a desk than wrestling with drunks. Then we both realized that Adrana had slipped away from the table. Find her, Father snapped at Paladin. The robot swiveled its head and rolled away from the table, picking a path through the brawl. Someone gave Paladin a kick just for the fun of kicking a sentient machine. Paladin was used to that sort of thing. It wobbled a lot, but it managed to stay upright. It should have kept a better eye on her, Father said, fuming as he tugged his sleeves back down. Paladin can't help it, I said. It's just an old robot trying its best. Look, I'll go see if I can find her. They were only letting people in through the north entrance, right? No, Father said, wiping a hand across his brow. They were using both entrances. You can bet your sister's headed for one of them. Paladin was still sweeping the room, its dome spinning around, lights flashing in agitation behind the glass. All right, I said, you go to the cloakroom where we came in. I'll go to the south entrance. Can I trust you to come back, said Father? Well, of course. And I meant it. I had no intention of disobeying him. I just wanted all of us to get back on the tram and ride along Johnsbury Road to the house, away from the drunken chaos that had started out as a polite civic function. I wanted to be back in my room on the 3rd floor next to the parlor, with all our books and maps and games. Well, be quick about it, said Father. I left the table skirting the brawl, which was quieting down now as more constables arrived, and began to make my way along the length of the hall. A clammy, cold hand closed on my wrist. That sister of yours is a disruptive influence. The sooner she's out of your life, the better. Shall we look for her together? I'm all right, Doctor, I said, slipping from his grasp. You keep a watch on this room. The robot's trying to find her, but its vision system isn't very effective. You're a good girl, Ara Führer. At least one of you's turning out the right way. Fitting memorial to your mother. Thank you, Dr. Morchanks. The insult had slipped out accidentally, almost as if Adrana was inside me, stirring up mischief. I flashed an awkward smile and broke away from him, knowing that with his limp, he could never keep up with me. We had our best dresses on and our boots, but we could hitch up our hems and run in them if we needed to, so. The hall was much, much longer than it was wide. It needed to be, with so much history to cover. To begin with, before I knew what it was all about, I liked the fact the Hall of History was pretty, with that long black wall running the height and length of the room and the colored bars that were lit up all along its length like irregularly spaced fence posts. It was easy to be impressed by the glowing colors and the writing in them, and I was fixated on what was known. It was years later before I stopped to think about what the black intervals meant. Soon I was at the south door. It was open, and warm evening was pushing in from outside. Constables were trying to impose order and stopping people from coming back in. A man was insisting that he needed to get back into the cloakroom where his wife was waiting, and an argument was brewing as they told him to go around the front of the building, which he felt was too much trouble. Another hand closed around mine. I twisted away, half expecting to see the doctor again, but it was Adrana. Good, she said. Now we can have some fun. Adrana started dragging me to the door. I suppose it'd take you back to Father, I said. Oh, come on, Führer. Her eyes were wide with anticipation. I knew she'd had a glass of wine when we came in, but there was nothing foggy or reddened about her. We're a stone's throw from Neural Alley. I've got some coins. Let's go and live a little. I'm not interested in Neural Alley. How can you know if you've never been there? And you have? But we were through the door now into the evening, and there was no chance of the constables letting us back in through the south door. I glanced back in time to catch a glimpse of Paladin still sweeping the room, working its way gradually towards the door. Come on, Adrana said. They won't blame you. I'm always the one setting a bad example, aren't I? We went down the steps to the entrance, followed a line of lanterns through the museum, then crossed the train tracks at Johnsbury Road. The Dragon Gate was a neon portal before us, with the narrow winding passage of Neural Alley extending beyond it, curling its way south in the general direction of Hadramaw Station. I stared a bit at the Dragon Gate, just as I always stared at flicker boxes and screens when I caught them in public spaces. It was a bust of brightness and color like nothing we had at home. You weren't very nice to Moonface, I said. Adrana had a hand around my sleeve and was dragging me towards the gate. And you have no idea what a creep he really is. I know what he wants to do to you. They've come up with this medicine now. It slows down biological growth, allows adults to stop their children from ever growing up. Well, why would anyone ever want that? She looked back at me with an exasperated expression. You're so naive, Führer. And you're only a bit older than me. We ducked through Dragon Gate into the glow and swelter of Neural Alley. Adrana grinned back at me. We're in. Look at us, Führer, dressed up to the nines and out on the town here. And she dug out her purse and passed me a two-bar coin. This is half of what I got on me, so make it count. I stared down at the heavy metal disc of coin, not sure what to make of this gift. Thanks, I said doubtfully, but I've caught up with you, haven't I? We should go back. You can still say you've seen Neural Alley. But Adrana was moving forward, confident, as if she already knew the place. Watch out for pickpockets and gropers now, Adrana said, as if my words counted for nothing. We'll go all the way along and then come out at the cat gate. And then we go home? Of course, she grinned back at me. Where else? That was Revenger by Alistair Reynolds. Our next nominee is Bannerless by Carrie Vaughan, Mariner, Holton, Mifflin, and Harcourt. Publishers.
Thank you. I will start at the beginning. Enid came downstairs into a bright kitchen full of the greasy smell of cooked sausage. Olive already had breakfast, sausage, toast, cream, set out on the table. In her dress and apron, her dark hair pulled back with a scrap of cloth, she was already at work, but shouldn't have been, in Enid's opinion. How are you feeling? Enid asked, hoping to keep any worry out of her voice. I wish people would stop asking me that, Olive said, not looking up from the batch of dough that she was kneading, folding and punching it into the counter as if she could make it disappear. 3 other batches of dough sat rising in nearby bowls. Serenity household didn't need that much bread. Olive would probably trade it around the rest of Haventown. Enid couldn't help herself. How long you been up? Olive's smile was strained. Up before Beryl this morning. Beryl worked early shift at the goat farm outside of town. He was usually the first one up. Are you sure you shouldn't be resting? You don't have to work so hard. I want to be useful. I have to be useful. You are, Enid thought. Maybe part of Olive resting was just leaving her alone to mourn the miscarriage and recover in her own way, which maybe meant making too much bread. Tea? Olive asked as Enid sat and took up a knife to smear cream on a slice of toast. Sure. Olive smiled broadly. Such a little thing could please her. She bustled between the stove and counter to get the pot ready. Of course, she already had water heated. When the tea was poured, Enid wrapped her hands around the earthenware mug to soak in the warmth, breathing in the steam, and tried not to nag too much. They made small talk about the weather and the town, the late summer market coming up, and which of the outlying households might travel in, which of their far-off friends might visit, usual gossip about who was sleeping with whom and whether the grain harvest was going to be over or under quota. And if it was over, would the committee let a couple of fields go fallow next year? Though some would grumble that with the surplus, the town could support a couple more mouths, hand out a couple more banners. Folk always wanted more banners. After breakfast, Enid helped clean up, but only got as far as wiping down the table. Olive had already taken the plate and cup from her hands to put in the wash basin. What are you up to today, then? Olive asked. I'm off to see if the clinic needs any help. Work's been slow lately. Well, it's good that work's slow, yeah? When Enid had work, it meant that something had gone wrong. It is. She put a vest over her tunic, took her straw hat from its hook by the door and went outside. Didn't get much farther than that and stopped, seeing Thomas coming down the walk toward her. Thomas was a middle-aged man, his hair silvering, tied back in a short tail, his face pale and weathered, laugh lines abundant. Average height, a commanding gaze. He wore his investigator's uniform, a plain belt and boots, simple tunic and trousers in a dark brown the color of earth, much deeper than any usual homespun or lightly dyed brown. A charge lit her brain. They had a job. Up for a tough one, he asked in greeting. What is it? A suspicious death out at Pasadena. His frown pulled at the lines in his face. Enid stood amazed. She had investigated thefts and fraud, households that tried to barter the same bags of grain or barrels of cider twice or that reneged on trades. She'd broken up fights and tracked down assaults. She had investigated Bannerless pregnancies, women who'd gotten pregnant either because their implants had failed or, more rarely, because they thought to have a baby in secret. Keeping such a thing secret was nearly impossible. To her knowledge, no one ever had. Though she supposed if they had managed to keep such a secret, no one would ever know. If you asked most folks, they'd say a Bannerless pregnancy was the worst of the work she did, the hardest, because she would be the one to decide if the case was an accident that could be made right, or malicious flouting of everything the Coast Road community stood for. Murder had become rare, much rarer than in the old world, according to the survivor stories. It still happened, of course. It always happened when enough people filled in at close enough quarters. But Enid never thought she'd see one herself, and maybe she still wouldn't. Suspicious death was only suspicious, but Thomas seemed grim. Maybe you'd better come in and explain, she said. Thomas made himself at home in the kitchen, settling into a chair at the table. Olive, still at the counter kneading bread, looked up. Hey, company, can I get you some tea? The bright greeting was habit. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening. It was the uniform, always a shock seeing it, no matter if an old friend like Thomas wore it. I'd love some tea, thanks, Thomas said. How are you, Olive? His tone was friendly, casual, an everyday question, not the pointed one Enid and the rest of the household had been asking her for the last week. And so Olive was able to give him an unforced smile. Just fine, she said, wiping her hands on a dishcloth, then scooping fresh leaves from their jar into the pot. If this is about work, I can leave you two alone. It's all right, Thomas said. You're busy. Stay. Olive finished prepping the teapot, then went back to her dough, slapping the 4th batch into a smooth loaf, round and puffed and smelling of yeast. So what's this about? Enid asked. Suspicious death was frustratingly nonspecific. A committee member at Pasadena requested the investigation. Man in his 30s, no other information. That's maybe 30 miles south, yeah, Enid asked, not a big place. A couple hundred folks, stable enough, mostly subsistence farming and some trade. Healthy community, everyone at Regional thought. But are they really thinking murder? At the counter, Olive stopped kneading and glanced over, blinking disbelief. Sam wandered in then, barefoot, shirtless, all wiry body, brown skin and ropey muscles. Her Sam was thin but powerful. Folk thought he was weak until he hefted 50-pound bags of grain on his shoulder with one hand. He stood fast in storms. Murder? What? He muttered sleepily, then saw Thomas in the uniform. Oh, it's work. I'll go. He started to turn around. Stay, Sam, Thomas said. Have some tea. Sam looked at Enid for confirmation, and she hoped her smile was comforting. This would be all right. This was her job, after all. And Sam was family, part of what made her able to do the job. Someone to come home to. Morning, dear, she said and kissed his cheek. He sank into a chair at the kitchen table and accepted a fresh mug from Enid. Murder, you said. He tilted his head, a picture of bafflement, and who could blame him? Thomas continued. No one's said the word murder, but they want us to check. He turned to Enid. You up for that? You do to carry this one as lead. Well, yes, somebody's got to, I suppose, but are there witnesses? What happened? Don't know yet. They saved the body. We'll see what we see. If they've got a body on ice, we ought to hurry, she said. I was hoping to foot it in a couple of hours after we've had a chance to go through the records. Well, that was her day planned, wasn't it? Is everything going to be all right? Olive asked. They all looked at Thomas, the elder and mentor, for the answer to that, and he took a moment to reply. How did you answer that? Certainly, most things would be all right for most people, but they never would be again for the dead man and the people who loved the person he'd been. Nothing for you to worry about, Thomas said. That's our job. Our job, investigators, moving through communities like brown-draped shadows of ill tidings. Oh, I'll always worry, said good, sweet Olive, and the smile she gave them was almost back to normal. Then she sighed. At least it's not a banner violation. She'd become deeply sympathetic to households caught in banner violations. Wanting a baby badly enough could make someone break the rules, she'd say, and then insist that she would never do such a thing herself, of course. But she could sympathize. After all, you could follow all the rules, earn a banner, and then nature plays a cruel trick on you. On the wall above the kitchen door hung a piece of woven cloth, a foot square on each side, a red and green checked pattern for blood and life. Their banner that the four of them had earned. They'd all come from households that put their banners on the wall as a mark of pride. This was their first, and they could hope that there would be more. Then Olive had miscarried. They had a banner and no baby to show for it. Enid kept telling Olive that they had time and more chances. No one could take the banner away. Thank you.
That was Bannerless by Carrie Vaughan. The seventh nominee this year is All Systems Red by Martha Wells, published by Tor.com. And Martha couldn't be here tonight. Reading for her will be Alexandra Renwick. Excuse me.
I'm cursed with a silent W in the middle of my last name, so that's why some of you may know me as Camille Alexa. I just chopped off everything that people used to mispronounce when I started writing. So Martha sent me this. She's wonderful. I know her from Austin, Texas, where I grew up, and Martha lives, of course, in the area and couldn't be here tonight. So she sent me this. I hope it's in the book because I haven't gotten to read the Murderbot book yet. I don't care much about who my clients are or what they're trying to accomplish. I knew this group was from a freehold planet, but I hadn't bothered to look up the specifics. Freehold meant it had been terraformed and colonized, but it wasn't affiliated with any corporate confederations. Basically, freehold generally meant shit show, so I hadn't been expecting much from them, but they were surprisingly easy to work for. I cleaned all the stray fluids off my new skin and then climbed out of the cubicle. That was when I realized I hadn't put on the pieces of my armor, and it was all over the floor, covered in my fluids and Baradwage's blood. No wonder Mensa had looked into the cubicle. She probably thought I was dead in there. I put all back into its slots in the reclaimer for repair. I had an alternate set, but it was still packed into storage and would take extra time to pull it out and do the diagnostics and the fitting. I hesitated over the uniform, but the security feed would have notified Mensa that I was awake, so I needed to get out there. It was based on a standard research group's uniforms and meant to be comfortable inside the habitat, knit gray pants, long-sleeve t-shirt and jacket like the exercise clothes humans and augmented humans wore, plus soft shoes. I put it on, tugged on the sleeves down over the gun ports on my forearms, and went out into the habitat. I went through 2 interior secure doors to the crew area and found them in the main hub, in a huddle around the console, looking at one of the hovering displays. They were all there except Baradouage, who was still in the infirmary, and Valescu, who was sitting there with her. There were mugs and empty meal packets and on some of the consoles, and I'm not cleaning that up unless I'm given a direct order. Mensa was busy, so I stood and waited. Rati glanced at me and then did a startled double take. I had no idea how to react. This is why I prefer wearing the armor, even inside the habitat where it's unnecessary and can just get in the way. Human clients usually like to pretend I'm a robot, and that's much easier in the armor. I let my eyes unfocus and pretended I was running a diagnostic or something. Clearly bewildered, Rati said, "Who is this?" They all turned to look at me, all but Mensa, who was sitting at the console with the interface pressed to her forehead. It was clear that even after seeing my face on Valescu's camera video, they still didn't recognize me without the helmet. So then I had to look up at them and say, "I'm your sec unit." They all looked startled and uncomfortable, almost as uncomfortable as I did. I wished I'd waited to pull the spare armor out. Part of it is they didn't want me here. Not here in their hub, but here on the planet. One of the reasons the bond company requires it, besides slapping more expensive markups on their clients, is that I was recording all of their conversations, all of the time. Though I wasn't monitoring anything I didn't need to do a half-assed version of my job. But the company would access all those recordings and data mine them for anything they could sell. No, they don't tell people that. Yes, everyone does know it, and no, there's nothing you can do about it. After a subjective half hour and an objective 3.4 seconds, Dr. Mensa turned, saw me, and lowered the interface. She said, "We were checking the hazard report for this region to try to learn why that thing wasn't listed under hazardous fauna. Pin Lee thinks the data has been altered. Can you examine the report for us?" "Yes, Dr. Mensa." I could have done this in my cubicle and we all could have saved the embarrassment, but anyway, I picked up the feed she was watching from Hub System and started to check the report. It was basically a long list of pertinent info and warnings on the planet, and specifically the area where our habitat was, with emphasis on weather, terrain, flora, fauna, air quality, mineral deposits, possible hazards related to any of those, with connections to sub-reports with more detailed information. Dr. Girathin, the least talkative one, was an augmented human and had his own implanted interface. I could feel him poking around in the data, while the others, using the touch interfaces, were just distant ghosts. I had a lot more processing power than he did, though. I thought they were being paranoid. Even with the interfaces, you actually have to read the words, preferably all the words. Sometimes non-augmented humans don't do that, and sometimes augmented humans don't do it either. But as I checked the general warning section, I noticed something was odd about the formatting. A quick comparison with the other parts of the report told me that, yeah, something had been removed, a connection to a sub-report broken. "You're right," I said, distracted as I rifled through the data storage looking for the missing piece. I couldn't find it. It wasn't just a broken connection. Somebody had actually deleted the sub-report. That was supposed to be impossible with this type of planetary survey package, but I guess it wasn't as impossible as all that. "Something's been deleted from the warnings and the section on fauna," I said. The reaction to that in general was pretty pissed off. There were some loud complaints from Pinley and Overse and dramatic throwing hands in the air from Rati, but like I said, they were all friends and a lot less restrained with each other than my last set of contractual obligations. It was why, if I forced myself to admit it, I had actually been enjoying this contract up until something tried to eat me and Baradouage. Sex systems record everything, even inside the sleeping cabins, and I see everything. That's why it's easier to pretend I'm a robot.
Thank you. That was from All Systems Red by Martha Wells. And the whole point of this award that we give out every year for, 34 years now, is to remember and celebrate Phil Dick and the fact that so much of his best work came out originally in mass market paperbacks that were generally on the racks for a few weeks and then disappeared. They were kind of the lowest level of publishing at the time. In fact, I just discovered One of his books came out in England credited to R.A. Dick, who was the author of The Ghost and Mrs. Muir. That's a lot of respect from a publisher there. I think all 7 works indicate pretty clearly how strong the field is right now. And let's give a hand to all the nominees. I know this year's judges did not have an easy time of it. There were several other works that could have made the ballot and didn't. It was a very strong ballot overall. The award, every year we do not give out a trophy for the Phil Dick Award. The winner does get struck by a pink beam of light, but we do not say when or where that will happen. What we do as award administrators is give the winners money. I believe the money is tax-free, yours to do with as you wish. This year, the special citation for the Phil Dick Award goes to After the Flare by Deji Bryce Olakatan.
I was just finding out what that meant, a special citation. Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment to thank, in writing a story, there are two things that kind of get left out in sort of the publication process. One is that all the people who have helped you get there. So you can't see it from that distance, but I'm actually wearing a Yoda tie, which was inspired by my aunt, actually was given to me by my aunt, who introduced my family to a lot of science fiction movies and stories and has been a fearless cheerleader from the beginning. I've had a lot of friends and teachers along the way who've really helped me, so I'm very grateful for that. Also, unlike film where you see the credits at the beginning and the end, in a book you kind of have to look in the in the acknowledgments and try to work backwards and figure out who actually shaped the story. I think that's something that should change, especially today where people's time is so valuable and there's a lot of attention harvesting. Acknowledging my editor, Chris Heiser, Olivia Taylor-Smith, my agent, Gary Height. All of these people really shaped the book. And I think even looking at these covers, I was just spent a lot of time looking at how good they are. The people who create these covers obviously are talented artists. And so I'd love to see a shift at some point where we acknowledge that with a book, there's a lot of people behind it. And very rarely does an author stand on their own. There are geniuses like that, like Philip K. Dick, but there are a lot, most of us need help. So I'm very grateful for that. Just want to say, in writing this story, one reason why I wrote it, and you can hear that I looked at technology pretty closely, it was important to me, is I never saw a story like that by an author of color, an African-American author, an author of African descent. And I didn't see the story that I wanted to read, so I went out and did it. And in today's political moment, where a lot of things are happening that we agree and disagree with, the ability to imagine your own future is really important. So if the world isn't what you want it to be right now, if you can't imagine it, that makes it hard to get to that world that you want to see. And in my work. I didn't really explain that. My career has basically been as a social justice activist. One of the first things people want to do is close off your imagination. They close off your ability to express yourself and freeing yourself. Science fiction, I think, is incredibly freeing. You can imagine a better world for yourself. You can imagine a better future. And I think everyone has the right to do that. Everyone has the right to take that first step, especially if you are marginalized or you feel like your views don't quite fit the mainstream, they won't necessarily make it on Netflix, that I encourage everyone to do that and take that first step. So I think After the Flare is very much a testament to trying to create the future that I would like to see. I don't want a solar flare to wipe out civilization, but you get the idea. So thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here.
I hate to drag it out, but that does remind me that Phil Dick had plenty of help also, and there's a panel on his work tomorrow, and we'll probably get into more stories about some of the help he had. I should also mention that I believe we'll be taking photos of the nominees after the presentation of the final award, of the award. And I have it written on the envelope that Price Waterhouse says the winner is not La La Land. In fact, the winner this year of the Phil Dick Award is Bannerless by Carrie Vaughan.
I'm going to need to catch my breath for just a minute. I have a lot of things I want to say, and I'm going to try to articulate it. Yeah, people say you should tell more stories, and it's like I'm not a storyteller, I'm a writer. I have to go back and edit everything, and I can't do that right now. The first people I want to thank all of my fellow finalists for your words and your work and your inspiration. It was such a joy to be listed among all of you, and I will carry that with me. It's a great honor, and you are all very inspiring to me, so thank you for that. It's hard for me to express how much this means when you've been doing one kind of writing for a long time, and then you write a book that's kind of completely different than what you've been doing, and to get that kind of support and recognition. I don't think I can say how much that means to me, so thank you. And along those lines, I want to thank my editor, John Joseph Adams, and my agent, Seth Fishman, who both took a chance when I said I wanted to do something completely different, and they were cheerleaders for that rather than trying to get me to do what I had been doing for up till that point. I have so many people who've supported me in my family, my mom and my dad, my brother Rob, who's right over here. And thank you to Norwescon for putting on this fantastic party. Yeah, onward and upward. Thank you all so much.
So many people did so much to make tonight possible. We really appreciate our entertainment. Danny Goodenough's over here. Thank you, Danny. Adrian manning the door, passing out stuff, my house manager. Of course, the fabulous Gordon Van Gelder.
I don't think the fabulous Van Gelder is here.
Please take pictures. There is an autograph session tomorrow. Everyone is asked to sign. If you don't have a copy with you, you want to pick one up, they're available in the dealer's room. We really appreciate your help and support and your creativity. Thank you.
Thank you all.